Today's class is a foundational version of the LYT class Free Your Asana. It's the first of the 10 core LYT classes, and we'll be scaling it back today so we can really focus on the foundational aspects that make it a LYT class. You'll need a yoga block for this class, and I'll go over the blueprint of what makes it a LYT class. We start with a reset, which is all about establishing our neutral pelvis, beginning to work the core, and beginning to establish better movement patterns on and off the mat. After the reset, we move on to our first sequence. After the first sequence, we do one round of sun salutation A, move on to the second sequence, and the stream is the last part where we sequence the first and second sequences together. So the stream is a little bit more challenging. So I like to say, think of this LYT class as a marathon, not a sprint. So if you find that you're getting tired, or your alignment is getting a little bit messy because you're getting tired, you can pause, you can take a break, but make sure that you save enough energy for that stream at the end. Before we get started, we'll go over a few things. The first thing when we're weight bearing is energetically dialing out your hands. So when you're weight bearing on your hands, you've got your weight on your hands, you're gonna imagine that your hands are starting to dial out a little bit. And what that does is create a little bit of torque up the arms and find a really stable position for your shoulder blade. So we're not actually gonna pick up our hands and turn them out. We're just gonna keep the weight in the hands and imagine that we're starting to rotate the hands out. So it's kind of the same feeling as twisting a really tight jar. It's creating that little bit of torque around the arm. So that's the first thing. If I say dial the hands out, you're gonna keep the hands down and just imagine that the hands are maybe on plates and the plates are starting to rotate to the side. So that's the first thing we'll go over. The second thing we're gonna talk about a lot is our diamond. So our diamond is part of our pelvic bowl. The sides of the diamond are our pelvic points, or our ASISs. We talk about those a lot, drawing those two pelvic points in. But the top and bottom of the diamond would be the pubic bone at the front of the pelvis and the belly button. So we make this diamond shape sometimes, and we really want to imagine that the diamond is drawing in. So sides of the diamond draw in, top and bottom draw in. So it's like that whole diamond is collecting in towards center, and that's going to help us really keep that neutral pelvis and core engagement. With that said, when you're ready, we're going to start on our backs and start the reset. Starting on your back, we're going to check our triple S. Make sure the back of your skull is on the mat, your shoulder blades, also known as your scapula, and your sacrum right above your tailbone. We're going to make sure that that sacrum stays down. Make that diamond shape with your hands here. So your palms are going to rest on your pelvic points. Fingers point down towards your pubic bone at the front of the pelvis, and your thumbs will point up toward the belly button. So you've got that diamond shape. Hold the hands here, and we'll work our hip flexion. Picking up the right foot, any amount, bringing that right thigh toward the belly without the spine or the pelvis changing. Step it down, hold that sacrum down, pick up the left foot, bring the thigh toward the belly, any amount, without the spine or pelvis changing. You're going to alternate flexing the right hip and the left hip. So hip flexion is something you'll hear a lot about in my classes. That's the ability to move just the hip joint. So anytime we're bringing the belly toward the thigh or thigh toward the belly or hinging at the hips, that's that action of flexing at the hips. And it's one of the most functional things our bodies need to know how to do, especially as we get older. The ability to flex at the hips has a big effect on what happens to our knees and our ankles. So we always want to make sure we've got this movement pattern of hinging or flexing at the hips. Step both feet down. Grab your block. We're going to lift up into a supported bridge, putting the block right under our sacrum. So we want the block right above the tailbone. We don't want it so high that our glutes are hanging off. We want to be able to hold that neutral pelvis, neutral spine. So we're in the supported bridge. Again, make that diamond shape with your hands, palms to your pelvic points, fingers point down toward the pubic bone, thumbs up toward the belly button. And really think about drawing that diamond in. So the sides of the diamond draw in, top and bottom of the diamond draw in. And we'll hold here. Keep the glutes active. So even though we're not lifting off the block, we still want to have that engagement in the glutes. So almost feel like you could wrap your glutes down towards your heels. Lift your right palm up toward the ceiling. We'll take the left fingers and pull back across the right fingers, stretching that right wrist and right forearm. So as we multitask here, keep thinking about drawing that diamond in. Switch hands, left palm up, pull back with the right fingers, stretching that left wrist and forearm. Keep the glutes active, really draw those pelvic points in. Hands come along the sides of your body. We're gonna press into the feet, curl off the block, remove the block, and slowly lower your upper back, middle back, and lower back down. Grab your block, and now we'll put it in between the legs. So you can either have it the medium way or the thinnest way in between the thighs, whatever feels good. Keeping the feet down, check that the sacrum right above the tailbone is down. So anytime you're lying on your back, if you have an arch between your low back and the mat, that's showing that the pelvis is tipping forward, and we really want to hold that sacrum down so we can keep that neutral pelvis. Hands will interlace behind your head, and we'll draw the elbows in, which makes it easy for us to lift off the shoulder blades. So really pull that sacrum down toward the mat. Take a big inhale here. Exhale, lift up off your shoulder blades. So it's a really tiny lift. It might be just an inch or two. Look down at that same diamond area and imagine that diamond drawing in, sides of the diamond draw in, top and bottom of the diamond draw in. Inhale to lower. Exhale, lift up. Make sure the sacrum stays down so we're not arching the back here. Look down at the diamond. Think about collecting it. Draw the sides of the diamond together, top and bottom of the diamond. Inhale to lower. Exhale as you lift. Chin towards your throat. Now look at where the belly button is and imagine that you could pull the belly button down toward the ground. Hold that feeling. We're going to turn the ribs 1 inch to the right. So it's a tiny twist. Try to stay off that right shoulder blade. Keep pulling the belly button down. Come back to center. Inhale to lower. Exhale, lift up, chin towards your throat. Belly button draws down. Hold that feeling in the belly button. Turn your ribs 1 inch to the left. Try to stay off that left shoulder blade. Come back to center. Inhale to lower. Exhale, lift up, chin towards your throat. Collect the diamond. Draw those pelvic points in. Turn 1 inch to the right. Try to stay off this right shoulder blade. Come back to center. Inhale to lower. Exhale, lift up. Chin towards your throat. Belly button draws down. Turn 1 inch to the left. Try to lift off that left scapula. Come back to center. Inhale to lower. Release your arms. We're going to make our way onto quadruped, coming onto hands and knees. Shoulders will come right over the wrist, hips over the knees. We want to make sure we're not too wide in our quadruped. That will force us to tip the pelvis, and then our shoulders won't be in a stable position. So we want to make sure shoulders line up right over the wrist creases, hips over the knees. We're going to try that action of dialing the hands out. So if you look at my hands right now, they're not actually moving, but I'm doing that action of energetically dialing the hands out, and I can feel it all the way up my arms to my shoulder blades. Anytime we're weight bearing, lift your throat. If you let the head drop down, that's really going to affect what happens in the shoulders, shoulder blade, and neck. So lift your throat. You can think about a broom being behind your back. Would the broom touch the back of your skull, shoulder blades, and sacrum? Keep that neutral pelvis, drawing those two pelvic points in. Good, now that we've established that quadruped, we're going to put the block on our sacrum. So the block's going to come onto our lower back, and we're just going to have the block here to keep us honest. We're going to use it as some feedback to make sure that the pelvis stays really still as we move the hips. So I want you to stay in that really strong quadruped. Unweight your left knee, just lifting it up, and we're gonna rotate this left hip out. So the left hip does a little bit of external rotation, a little bit of abduction moving away from center, and then step it down. Unweight the right knee, abduct with a little bit of external rotation, and then lower it down. So it's kind of like a dog at a fire hydrant, but we want to just move from the hip and not turn the pelvis. So what happens is if we make the move too big and turn the pelvis, the block's gonna fall off. So if you notice the block is wiggling a lot or even falls off, you'll need to make the movement a little bit smaller so that you know it's just moving at the hip. So again, if we go too big with the hip, it's because the pelvis is turning and the back of the pelvis will rotate too, and that will knock the block off. So it's just a good way to really learn to move at the hip without moving the pelvis, getting that brain mapping so that you know this is the amount I can move my hip before the pelvis moves. So we'll be doing this later in the flow without the block. So just remember this feeling of the block behind your back. Take note of how far the hip can move before the block moves. Good, remove the block. Let's take a child's pose. Take the knees as wide as you'd like. Shift the hips back. You can extend the arms out. You can bend at the elbows, whatever feels good. And just take a few deep breaths here. Come back to that quadruped. We're gonna lift for downward dog. So again, we want the shoulders right over the wrist creases. Dial the hands out, lift your throat, draw those pelvic points in. Tuck your toes underneath you, lift the pelvis straight up, walk the feet forward toward the hands a little bit, and really bend the knees. We don't wanna force the heels down. We can keep the heels lifted and really lift your hip creases up toward the ceiling. So that's that same hip flexion we practiced. Our belly's getting closer to the thigh by lifting the pelvis up. And then check in with those front ribs. If you have any kind of arching or swaying here, really think about lifting those front ribs up toward the back body, staying really strong and stable in the arms and shoulders. We're gonna walk our hands back to our feet. So we're gonna press into the toes, let the heels lower, and we'll sit back into something called a happy squat. We'll be doing this a lot in LYT yoga. Any of our forward folds really look like this happy squat. So now we wanna move our hip creases back. Check that your knees are right over the ankles. So again, this is that hip hinge or hip flexion. Our belly is close to the thigh without rounding. So you wanna keep that feeling of the broom behind your back. Use your glutes as you rise to stand with that long spine. Walk to the top of your mat and we'll continue the reset with Sun Salutation 1, a foundational version. We'll inhale the arms forward and up. Lift your shoulder blades up towards your ears. As you exhale, hinge at your hips. Send your hip creases back. Just like that happy squat, make sure knees are over the ankles. Big bend in the knees so we can get the hands down. We're gonna step the right foot back, lower the right knee down and the top of the foot. So we're coming to a low lunge. Check that pelvic bowl. Think about collecting the diamond. Pelvic points draw in. Pubic bone and belly button draw toward each other. Arms reach up. Lift your shoulder blades up and squeeze your right glute. So the more you squeeze this right glute, that back leg, the more of a stretch you're gonna get in the front of that right hip. Lower your hands down, shoulders right over the wrist. Step that left foot back for quadruped. Pause here, dial out the hands. Lift your throat. Draw those pelvic points in. Think about collecting the diamond. Right foot steps through your hands. Low lunge on the other side. Check that upright pelvis. Really think about zipping your pubic bone up toward your belly button, wrapping this left glute down toward the heel. Reach your arms up. Big lift in the shoulder blades up toward the ears. Lower the hands. We're gonna step our left foot to meet the right. So if it's helpful, you can tuck the toes. You can use a block here and bring hands to the block. Left foot will step to meet the right. So we'll end up back in that forward fold, bending the knees, hinging the hips, reach the arms forward and up. Lift your shoulder blades up. Exhale, hinge at the hips. Check where your knees end up. Think about that broom behind your back. Big bend in the knees so the hands come down. This time, left foot steps back. Lower the knee, but not the toes this time. Lift up for that low lunge. Collect the diamond here. Sides of the diamond draw in. Top and bottom of the diamond draw in. Squeeze that left glute. We're gonna interlace just the fingers at the sacrum, right at that low back, and start to squeeze your shoulder blades in. So it might be a small movement. We wanna make sure that as we draw the shoulder blades together, we don't tip the pelvis or pop the ribs. So we really wanna knit this whole front body in, just squeezing those shoulder blades together. Lower the hands, untuck the left toes. Right foot steps back to quadruped. Pause here. Dial out the hands, lift your throat. Think about that broom behind your back. Collect the diamond here, holding that neutral pelvis. Left foot steps through. Tuck the right toes. Lift for that low lunge. Hold that pelvic bowl upright. Make sure your shoulders stack right on top of the pelvis. Interlace the hands at the low back. Squeeze those shoulder blades in without anything changing in the pelvis or the ribs. So make sure we're not popping out of place. Keep squeezing that right glute as you draw those shoulder blades in. Lower your hands down. You can use the block if that's helpful, maybe to the highest setting. Hands will come to the block. Get ready to step on this left foot. Right foot will step to meet the left. Hinging at the hips, bending the knees, reach the arms forward and up. Release the arms down. Moving on to sequence one. So that was all part of the reset. Make sure you have your block nearby. Reach the arms forward and up. Shoulder blades glide up toward the ears. Exhale, hinge at the hips. Same thing as that hip flexion. Belly's coming toward the thigh. Bend the knees enough to get the fingertips or hands down. Right foot will step back. Lower the knee, but not the toes. We're coming to that low lunge. Lift up, check that pelvic bowl. Shoulders over the pelvis. This time we're gonna reach the fingertips down. Squeeze that right glute. Now really try to reach your fingertips as if you could touch the ground with your fingertips. We're gonna send our left hip crease backwards as we hinge forward. So again, belly is coming toward that left thigh, so we're flexing at that left hip. Make sure the knee's not doing the moving. So we're not moving the knee forward, we're moving that left hip back as the belly comes toward the thighs. Reach those arms back. Maybe a little bit of squeeze together in the shoulder blades. Lift your belly, think about that broom behind your back. Bring your right hand to the block at whatever height feels best, lowest, medium, or highest setting. Your right shoulder is gonna line up right over that right wrist. Keep that same feeling of the left hip crease moving back toward the back of the mat. We're gonna rotate just the ribs 1 or 2 inches to the left, but make sure that the pelvis and the low back aren't moving. Pelvis stays level, we just rotate the ribs. Right ear will release to the shoulder so the neck is relaxed. If it feels good, float this left arm up, but don't let the left arm turn you. So the left arm just floats up and lands wherever. Only rotating the ribs. Coming into this nice twisted crescent. Left hip crease moves back. Lower the hands. You can remove the block. We're gonna step back to a plank pose. So we'll step the feet back for plank. Lower the knees. Think about collecting the diamond, dialing out the hands, lifting the throat. So we still want to think about that broom behind our back, so don't let the head drop down. As you exhale, lower as slowly as you can. Trying to lower everything together. Notice what usually touches the ground first. You can untuck your toes. We're going to come to a wide fingertip cobra. So we'll bring our fingertips out, wider than the mat. Head will come down, so you can just relax the head down. Imagine that you could lift your belly button away from the ground, squeezing your glutes. Start to squeeze the shoulder blades together. So you want to squeeze the shoulder blades in and then down the back. So we're getting this big stretch and opening in the front of the chest while we work the scapula. Keep lifting the belly. Hands come back under your shoulders. Lift to quadruped. Set up for that really strong quadruped. Shoulders over your wrist. Lift the throat. Dial out the hands. Collect the diamond. Draw those pelvic points in. Unweight the left knee. Instead of doing that fire hydrant move, we're just going to circle this left hip. Do a few circles in both directions. But again, think about just moving from that hip joint, not letting the pelvis move. Lower that left knee down. Unweight the right knee. Circle that right hip in both directions. Hold strong in the arms. Keep lifting your throat. Lower that right knee down. Tuck your toes. Lift up, down dog. Walk the feet in. Big bend in the knees. Find that hip flexion here. Lift your hip creases up so your belly comes closer toward the thighs. Find that neutral pelvis. Collect your diamond here. Draw those pelvic points in. Lift your pubic bone up toward the belly button. Lift your front ribs. On an exhale, bend your knees even more. We're going to walk the feet up toward the hands. Bending your knees, sit back into the hips. Bent knee forward fold. Make sure your knees are over the ankles. Press into the feet. Reach the arms forward and up. Second side, reach those shoulder blades up. Exhale, hinge at the hips. Belly's coming toward the thighs, so we're flexing at the hips. Left foot steps back. Lower the left knee, but not the toes. We're going to keep the toes tucked. Lift up. Check that low lunge here. Collect the diamond. Think about the shoulders stacking over the pelvis. Fingers reach down. Really reach those fingertips down. Squeeze this left glute. Good. We're going to hinge forward. So our right hip crease will move toward the back of the mat as the belly gets closer toward that right thigh. So it's kind of like our torso is hovering above this right thigh. Keep that feeling of the broom behind your back so that we don't round or collapse anywhere. Get your block ready. The block is going to go under that left hand this time at whatever height feels good. Shoulder will line up right over the wrist crease. Keep moving that right hip crease back so the pelvis stays level. Turn just the ribs 1 or 2 inches to the right. Don't let anything else move, just the ribs. Left ear releases toward the shoulder. Right arm can reach up, but don't let the arm force you into more of a twist. Let it land wherever it lands. Lift the belly. Lower that right hand, remove the block. We're going to step back to a plank pose. Once you get to your plank, lower your knees, pause here. You can untuck the toes, collect that diamond, dial out the hands, lift your throat, squeeze your glutes. They're part of the core. So keep the glutes squeezing as you exhale. Lower down with control. Notice what touches the ground first. Forehead will come down so the neck is neutral. Wide fingertip cobra. Come onto the fingertips. Elbows are up. Lift your low belly away from the ground. Keep squeezing your glutes. Draw the shoulder blades together and down the back. So our shoulder blades are retracting, squeezing in, and drawing down the back. So they're retracting with a little bit of depression. Keep that lift in the belly. Hands come under your shoulders. Lift to quadruped. Set up for that really strong quadruped, shoulders over your wrist. Dial out the hands. Lift your throat. Think about that broom behind your back. Collect the diamond. Unweight the right knee. Press evenly into the hands as you circle that right hip. So really imagine where that femur, our thigh bone, meets the hip. And imagine the circles coming right from that insertion of the femur into the hip. So they're teeny tiny. Release it down. Unweight the left knee. Keep that action of dialing out the hands as you circle this left hip, kind of like we're stirring a straw in a cup. Release that left knee. Tuck the toes, lift the pelvis straight up. Walk the feet in as much as you want. Bend the knees, really lift your hip creases up, finding more of that hip flexion, that belly to thigh action. Lifting your front ribs up toward the back body so we're not sinking into the shoulders. On an exhale, bend your knees even more. Walk your feet forward. Hinge at your hips. Check that the knees are over the ankles, not further than the toes. Press into the heels and toes. Use your glutes as you rise to stand. Release the arms down. We're going to take one round of sun salutation A. Reach the arms forward and up. Lift the scapula up toward the ears. Exhale, hinge. Belly comes toward the thighs, so big bend in your knees. Shoulders over your wrists. We're going to step to a plank pose. Lower the knees and pause here. You can untuck the toes. Lift your throat. Think about that broom behind your back. Dial out the hands. Zipper that pubic bone up. Squeeze your glutes as you lower the rest of the way down. Lower with control. Chin will come toward the throat so the neck is neutral. We're going to keep the hands down. Lift your belly, squeeze your glutes. Imagine your palms sliding backwards as the chest starts to draw through the hands. Low cobra. So as we come into this cobra, we're not trying to lift up really high. We want to keep that lift in the low belly so the low back stays long. Good, you can tuck your toes, either lift back to downward dog or you can take child's pose for a breath. Either option. On an exhale, bend your knees. Walk your feet forward. Big bend in the knees so you can hinge at the hips. Check that the knees are over the ankles. Press into the heels and toes. Use your glutes as you rise to stand with that long spine. Shoulder blades glide up. Release your arms. Moving on to our second sequence. Inhale, reach the arms forward and up. Lift your shoulder blades up. Exhale, hinge, but we're not going to lower all the way down to the ground this time. We're going to pause in this hip hinge, moving the hip creases back. Our right foot will step back. Bend that right knee, lift your upper body for our crescent lunge or high lunge. So we're gonna hold that pelvic bowl upright, make sure it's not tipping forward or tipping back, collect that diamond. We're gonna bring one hand to the front of the pelvis at the pubic bone, one hand to the back at the sacrum, and squeeze those hands together. Make sure your shoulders stay stacking right over the pelvis. Glutes are nice and strong. We'll hinge forward again, which means we're flexing or hinging at that left hip. So check the knee. The knee's going to stay where it is. It's not going to move forward. But as the upper body tips forward, our left hip crease will move back. So we're flexing or hinging at that left hip. Left hand will come to the outside of the pelvis or outer left hip. And the right hand will come to the inside of that left knee. So we're kind of just buttressing this knee so it doesn't start to drop in. So that right hand's just going to press into the inner side of that left knee. Left glute is working really hard since we're hinging here. Keep that engagement in the core. Think about that broom behind your back. Good. Lift back up. And we're going to turn toward the side of the mat for warrior two. Ground that right ankle. Turn toward the side of the mat. Check that pelvic bowl here. Make sure it's not tipping forward. Collect that diamond. Reach the arms out. Reverse it. Right hand will come to the right leg. Left arm comes up and over. Let the right ear release to the shoulder. Try to reach that left shoulder blade up as much as you can. Big stretch for the left side of the body. Back to warrior two. Warrior variation, left forearm to the thigh, right arm comes up and over. We're not gonna sink down here. We're gonna hold that neutral pelvis. Big stretch for the right side of the ribs. Back to warrior two. We'll plant the hands back at the front of the mat and step back to that quadruped. So we'll lower the right knee down. Left knee back to quadruped. Dial out the hands, lift your throat. Hold that neutral pelvis. Unweight the left knee. We'll do that same fire hydrant move. Move the knee out a little bit and then do it on the right side. So remember that feeling of when you had the block on your sacrum? Make the movement small enough that the block wouldn't fall off. So we're working on moving the hip without involving the pelvis. So we're really getting this in our brain mapping. Practicing over and over, moving the hip, holding that neutral pelvis. One more, each side. Keep dialing the hands out, lifting the throat. Tuck your toes, downward dog. Walk the feet in as much as you need. Lift those hip creases up. Draw those pelvic points in. On an exhale, bend your knees. Walk your feet forward. Hinge at the hips. Check where the knees end up. Press into the feet. Rise to stand. Second side. Exhale, hinge. We're not going to lower all the way down. Pause in this hip hinge. Think about that broom behind your back. Left foot steps back. Bend the left knee. Lift up for that high lunge or crescent lunge. Check that pelvic bowl. Collect the diamond. Draw those pelvic points in. Lift the pubic bone to the belly. Squeeze your glutes. Bring the left hand to the front of the pelvis. Right hand to the back of the pelvis. Give a little squeeze. Check that your shoulders are over the pelvis. We're going to tilt forward again. So as the upper body moves forward, right hip crease will move back. So check that the knee is not doing the moving. That right knee is going to stay right over that right heel. Left hand comes to the inside of that right knee. Right hand comes to the side of the pelvis or outer right hip. And just press this left hand into that right knee so it doesn't drop in. Keep that very long spine. Think about that broom behind your back. Right hip crease moves back. Even the left glute is squeezing here. Lift back up. Coming to warrior two, ground that left heel down. Open toward the side of your mat. Make any adjustments with the pelvis. Zipper that pubic bone up. Reach the arms out. We're going to hold that neutral pelvis and just think about moving the ribs side to side without moving the pelvis. Reverse it. Left hand down, right arm up and over. Let that left ear release to the shoulder. Really reach that right shoulder blade up. Back to warrior two. Right forearm to the thigh. Variation. Left arm comes up and over. Think about lifting your right ribs away from that right thigh. Back to warrior two. Plant the hands at the front of the mat. Lower back to quadruped. Left knee lowers down. Right knee comes back to quadruped. Dial out the hands. Lift your throat. Collect the diamond. Moving on to that fire hydrant move. Unweight the right knee. Press evenly into the hands. Move the knee out to the side. Lower it down. Unweight the left knee. Move it out to the side. Lower down. Keep alternating. Pressing evenly into the hands. Lift your throat. Think about that broom behind your back. Remember what it felt like to have the block at the sacrum. Make sure we're just moving in the hip, not the pelvis. Dialing out the hands. Tuck your toes. Lift your pelvis up, down dog. Walk the feet in and bend the knees as much as you'd like. Lift your front ribs up toward the back of the body. Exhale, bend your knees. Walk your feet forward. Hinging at the hips as if your belly could touch your thighs. Press into the feet, rise to stand. Release the arms. Moving on to the stream, where we're gonna sequence all of this work together so we can really establish that brain mapping. Make sure you have your block nearby. Reach the arms forward and up. Shoulder blades glide up. Exhale, hinge at the hips. And again, we'll pause here instead of coming all the way down. Send those hip creases back. Think about the broom behind your back. Right foot steps back. Tilted crescent or tilted high lunge. Left hip crease moves back, so the left knee stays right over the ankle. Lift your belly, really engage the glutes and the core. Right arm will reach straight forward. So by reaching our right arm up overhead, everything needs to work a little bit harder. That left glute needs to work harder, right glute, core. We're gonna ground that right foot for warrior variation. Right away, lower that left forearm to the thigh. Lift your bottom ribs away from that left thigh and squeeze your right glute. Warrior variation. Let the head relax. Back to warrior two. Reverse it. Right hand down, left arm up and over. Let that right ear release. Come back to warrior two. We're going to turn toward the front of the mat. Right hand will come on top of the block at whatever height feels good. Twisted crescent. Left hip crease moves back. You can keep the right knee up. If it feels better to lower it back down, take that option. Right shoulder is right over the wrist crease. Left hip crease moves back so the pelvis stays neutral. Left arm reaches out. Rotate just in the ribs without turning the pelvis or low back. Twisted crescent. Right ear releases toward the shoulder. Lift your belly as if you were still hovering it over that left thigh. Plant that left hand down, move the block to the side. We're gonna step to a plank pose. Once you get to your plank, lower the knees, untuck the toes. Collect the diamond, draw those pelvic points in, lift the pubic bone up, dial out the hands. Lift your throat. Squeeze your glutes as you lower the rest of the way down. This time, head will come down and we'll take a locust pose. Arms come along the sides of your body. Lift your belly button as if you could lift your belly off the ground. Squeeze your glutes. Peel the shoulders away from the ground. So we're squeezing those shoulder blades in a little bit, but keep that lift in the belly. Hands come back under your shoulders. Lift to quadruped. Set up for that strong quadruped. Dial out the hands. Lift your throat. Collect the diamond. Unweight that left knee. Circle the hip. Both directions. So again, make it small. Make sure that if you had a block on your sacrum, the block wouldn't fall off. Switch, unweight the right knee. Circle that right hip joint. Notice if you're favoring one hand over the other. Really straighten both arms, lift your throat. Lower down, tuck the toes, downward dog. Lift your hip creases up toward the ceiling. Lift the front ribs, collect your diamond. Exhale, bend your knees, walk your feet forward. Hinge at the hips. Make sure knees are over the ankles. Use your glutes as you rise to stand. Second side, exhale, hinge. Pause in this hip hinge. Think about that broom behind your back. Left foot steps back, tilted crescent. Right hip crease moves back so the pelvis is neutral. Left arm reaches forward. Use both glutes, so really squeeze that left glute, squeeze the right glute. Keep that tone in the abdominals. Ground that left foot, right forearm comes to the thigh. Warrior variation. Let the ear release to the shoulder. Squeeze that left glute. Back to warrior two. Reverse it, left hand down, right arm up and over. Keep drawing those pelvic points in. Warrior two. We're gonna turn back to the front of the mat for twisted crescent. Left hand will come to the block at whatever height feels good. Right hip crease moves backwards. You can keep this left knee up or lower it back down. Modified twisted crescent. Keep that long spine. Right arm reaches out. Rotate just in the ribs, so we don't want to twist the low back at all. Just the thoracic spine rotates where the ribs are. Left ear releases to the shoulder. Lift the belly. So we're really flexing that right hip right now, moving that right hip crease back. Lower the right hand. You can remove the block, stepping to plank pose. Once you find your plank, lower the knees, untuck the toes, collect the diamond, dial out the hands, lift your throat. Squeeze your glutes as you lower the rest of the way down. Coming to that locust pose, forehead will come down, keeping that neutral neck. Arms to your sides, lift your belly, squeeze your glutes. We want to keep that deep core engagement. Lift the shoulders away from the ground by squeezing those shoulder blades in. Keep lifting the belly. Hands come back under the shoulders, quadruped. Shoulders right over the wrists. Think about that broom behind your back. Dial out the hands, collect the diamond. Unweight the right knee, circle that right hip. Make sure it's just that hip moving, not the pelvis. Both directions. Lower down, unweight the left knee. Circle, starting at that left hip joint. So really imagine right where that thigh bone meets the hip, that's where the circles are coming from. Lower down, tuck your toes, lift for down dog. Lift your hip creases up, lift your front ribs. Big breaths in and out. Walk your feet forward. Big bend in the knees. Keep that long spine. Send those hip creases back. Use your glutes as you rise to stand. Release the arms down. Give yourself a round of applause. You finished the stream. We're going to cool down. Make your way back onto the mat and take a few rounds of cat-cow to stretch it out. So you can move through regular cat-cow. You can move side to side. Any type of movement that feels good. We'll come onto our backs. Make sure you have your block nearby. And we'll end with the feet on the mat. Checking in with that triple S, back of the skull, shoulder blades, and sacrum are on the mat. We're going to put the block underneath the right foot. So you can put it at the highest, medium, or lowest setting. Flex that left hip. So we're going to bring that left thigh toward the belly, flex the foot, externally rotate. So we're coming into a figure 4 stretch. Left ankle will cross over that right thigh. So if you find that that feels like a little too much in that left hip, you can remove the block or put it at a lower setting. But having the block under that right foot is going to get a little bit more hip flexion for that right side. And the more we flex at the right hip right now, the more of a stretch we're going to get in that outer left hip. So just see what feels best. Hands can stay somewhere on the body, or you can goal post your arms, bringing the elbows right out of the shoulders, forearms on the ground. And just take a few deep breaths here as we stretch that left hip. Switch sides. Bring that left foot down. Block will come to the left foot, right under that left foot at whatever height feels good. Right hip flexes, knee comes toward the belly. Externally rotate, flexing the foot. Left or right ankle will cross over that left thigh. Check that the sacrum stays down, shoulder blades in the back of the skull. Even here, we want to collect that diamond, holding our neutral pelvis. If it feels good, goal post your arms up towards your head. And really just feel the stretch in your right hip. We worked the hips quite a bit today. So we always want to make sure we give a little stretch and release. Release it down. As we come to Shavasana, you can use the block in any way that feels comfortable. You don't have to use it at all. If you want to put it back under the sacrum and just kind of release some of that low back or pelvic tension, sometimes a supported bridge feels really nice for Shavasana. But if you'd rather just not use the block, do whatever feels best. Take a moment to get settled. Soften your forehead. Soften your jaw. If you can feel that you're holding on to any tension, try to let it go as you exhale. Allowing yourself some quiet and stillness in your mind and body. Staying here in Shavasana as long as you'd like.